Please talk about the Jehovah's Witnesses. Sure. Well, the Jehovah's Witnesses largely started out as a doomsday cult who got really popular around the First World War, which makes a lot of sense. If you're seeing all of this death and destruction and depravity, it does make you think that the world is ending. However, the world didn't end, and they made multiple predictions about the end of the world that did not come to pass. Now, I want to give a shout out to Nate.fm. He has a wonderful page where he does these very detailed breakdowns of not just Jehovah's Witnesses, but also Mormons. And if you haven't seen his page yet, please watch it. It's very detailed and it's very well made. However, the main thing to understand about Jehovah's Witnesses is that they place a great deal of emphasis over control, and one of the ways that they do that with their members is through time. From 1920 to 2023, it was required that you submitted these time cards to prove how many hours you were evangelizing. And if you were submitting 30 hours a month, you were considered an auxiliary pioneer. If you submitted 50 hours a month, you were considered a regular pioneer. So that is a lot of time. That is going to keep you away from outside influences or finding ways to improve yourself, for instance, in finding an education. And I personally knew a family of Jehovah's Witnesses who were very much discouraged from going to a 4-year university. If there was someone who was capable of improving themselves through education, they were instead encouraged to either get married and have kids or to go to a trade school. Now, a trade school isn't necessarily a bad thing, but when you have members who have a great deal of potential and they're discouraged from finding an education, either because they're women and their place is in the home, or because they would be harder to control, that is a sign of a cult. And Jehovah's Witnesses, or Watchtower, have a tendency to have a monopoly on information. They have a governing body in New York who gets to dictate what their followers believe. And if you study the governing body over time, you'll see that they can currently have a tendency to have these controversial beliefs suddenly be erased by what is known as new light. So they will have this belief that is clearly false, and instead of owning up to it, they will say, oh, we actually have some new light, we're actually doing this now, which makes it highly reactionary and often subject to trends or simply just the zeitgeist. This is how you can have multiple failed doomsday predictions as well as false beliefs simply be erased by the church. You can claim that you have new light and therefore your old beliefs are wrong and your new beliefs are right, as a continuing restoration of God's kingdom in a sense. And you also have some instances of beliefs that changed over time in the Jehovah's Witnesses. They used to be against vaccines and they were in favor of blood transfusions. Now they forbid blood transfusions because they consider it to be eating blood, and they are somewhat in favor of vaccination. What's highly concerning about this is that the church has openly celebrated children who have died because they refused blood transfusions. People who would still be alive today if it weren't for the church. And there's other instances too where they protect predators in the church because they have this thing known as a 2-witness rule, where if you are a victim of SA, you need 2 witnesses in order to prove your case. Well, how many times are there usually 2 witnesses in cases of SA? Usually it's just you and the assailant, which makes it incredibly difficult for victims to find justice. Another method used by the leaders of Jehovah's Witnesses to manipulate their followers is by the construction and sale of kingdom halls. They'll have their members volunteer their time and effort to build these kingdom halls and then sell them in these lucrative real estate deals to other organizations or to simply private corporations. Bear in mind that if you are a practicing Jehovah's Witness and you work for another church that is considered heretical, like even as a custodian or a contractor, that is considered sinful. However, if the leaders of your church sell the kingdom hall to another religious organization for profit, that is not considered sin somehow when it goes against the teachings of the church itself. In short, Jehovah's Witnesses are a high control group that is considered a failed doomsday cult that later became a religion. They try to capitalize on people's time, and in many ways they try to insulate your flow of information so that you're only receiving information from the governing body.